cheap, plentiful, pure, addicting, and deadly. What I'm talking about, of course, is heroin and prescription opiates. And because of these substances, people are dying in this state, people are dying in this county, and people are dying right here in your community, Washington Township. Nationally, 23.5 million people are in need of addiction treatment. As the prosecutor said, we lose 170 or 175 members of our community each and every day nationally to this epidemic, to this plague. That's about one individual, one mom or dad, or one brother and sister every 10 minutes. So if we're here for about 2 hours tonight, 12 people will be extinguished by this disease. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. I know that addiction is in this room. I'm certain of it. I'm certain based on statistics. Because it does not discriminate. The disease of addiction absolutely does not discriminate. And just to be clear, because I just told this room that it's here, I told a room filled with police chiefs the exact same thing. I told a room filled with your elected officials the exact same thing, that it's in the room. Maybe you have certain images in your head as to what a heroin user or an opioid user is, and you maybe want to get those out of your head because that's just the continuation of that stigma. Because you can look left and you can look right, and that could be an opioid user. It absolutely does not discriminate. And we're going to talk a little bit about stigma tonight, right? Because what we see as stigma is one of the main barriers to beating this. So until we start tearing that stigma away from this, we will not overcome this plague. So my goal tonight up here in front of you is to give you an Opiates 101. So a street opiates 101. It's about arming you, members of the community, so you know what's happening on your streets and in your communities. It allows you to be better parents, right? Education, understanding the things that your children, your middle schoolers, your high schoolers are exposed to. So we're going to definitely do this 101. We're going to then talk about the epidemic or the plague and how we got here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what we in law enforcement are doing. So just so you have a little bit of background on where I'm coming from, I'm the Chief Assistant Prosecutor of our Special Operations Division. There are multiple units within that division. Our Special Enforcement Unit, which is our traditional narcotics unit, the task force, as well as Intelligence, Fugitive, High-Tech Crimes Unit, and the Asset Forfeiture Unit. So all these units are working hand in hand together. They're made up of detectives, assistant prosecutors, and municipal officers that are working with us as task force officers. So your Special Enforcement Unit essentially used to be the unit that would focus on the vice crimes, right? Gambling, prostitution, and narcotics enforcement. But really where most of our efforts are at this point would be opiate investigations. Why? Because that's what's killing our citizens. So we're spending a lot of time working in that area. Now, at the county level, our main goal on the enforcement side is to go after that for-profit drug distributor, as the prosecutor said. And we're working with the local municipalities to put those cases on the table. We have certain specialized abilities like wiretaps and things like that, and we do that a lot. Let me move right in, as I promised, that 101. So let's start with the pharmaceuticals. Well, why would I start here, right? We're here about heroin. Why would I start with pharmaceuticals with my 101? And the reason I start here is so much of the problem starts here. If anything's the gateway, it's the medicines that come from the doctors. I just use that word medicine, but really I should probably be using the word poison, because when it's abused, that's exactly what it is. And the other reason I start here in my 101 is because so much of the heroin issue starts here. We know that 80% of our heroin users started their opiate use with a prescription opiate, the thing that came from a pharmacy. And the other thing that you should know is that historically, nationally, more members of our community were killed from the prescription opiates than they were from the heroin. It was actually the leading killer when you broke down opiates as a whole. So the point is, these prescription opiates are every bit as deadly, if not more, than heroin. Your brain doesn't really able to tell the difference between heroin when it's on board or when it's ingested and a prescription opiate when it's on board. It's going to affect those same receptors. So don't misunderstand that. You guys recognize these? I'm sure they're home in medicine cabinets. I'm sure of it. These are commonly prescribed. They hit the streets in all different ways, and probably one of the main ways they hit the streets is from your medicine cabinet. Because what I assure you is when a burglar breaks into your home, the first thing that burglar does, they don't go to your jewelry box, they go to the medicine cabinet. They go there because they can either take these prescription pills, these poisons, and sell them, or maybe they're breaking into your house because they need them to use them. So diversion from homes, from sort of the lawful dispensing of prescriptions is one of the main reasons. Of course, they come from overseas. They come from dirty doctors. There are, believe it or not, some doctors in our community or throughout the state or throughout the nation that are no different than a drug dealer standing on the corner, just pushing these pills at high levels, sometimes knowing, sometimes just irresponsible. That's, of course, a way. There's robberies and things like that that occur. People, target pharmacies, go in to get these prescription medications. And what you should really see up here is sort of this mixing between crime, things that we're experiencing on the street, and this epidemic. So continuing on that 101, how are these prescription opiates used? I want you to kind of remember this screen as I get to heroin later on, because what you're going to see is they're pretty much abused in the same way or similarly. I'm sure many of you were kind of in your head, well, how's heroin used, right? It's intravenous. And it doesn't start there. It's kind of a bit of a barrier of entry, right? No one really wants to stick a needle in their arm. So it doesn't start often with that. It starts off by snorting it. So what they do is they crush up the pills. They often, depending on the type of a poison, type of medication, they take advantage of that time-release mechanism, and they get all of that medicine or then poison at once. And you can kind of also remember the effects, because you'll see when we talk about heroin, it's the same effects. I want you to remember the price as well, $30. So in our area, what we typically are saying in Morris County is about $1 a milligram. So a 30 milligram oxycodone pill is going to go between $20 and $30. 20 if you're going to buy in bulk, 30 if you're going to buy in a smaller quantity. I have this slide up here for all the skeptics, and I'm sure I have some because of an audience this large that there's going to be some skeptics in it. And I'm sure some people are sitting there thinking, this is an urban issue. This is a Passaic County, Essex County, Hudson County issue. It's not in beautiful Washington Township. It's not in beautiful Morris County. And what I'm showing you here is that there was a 205% increase between 2014 and 2015 of submissions of just Morris, Warren, and Sussex counties to the New Jersey State Police Lab. So what this means is any law enforcement action where pills are seized in these counties that get sent down to the State Police Lab. So the pills are being seized in your community. It is here. Again, it does not discriminate, this disease, so it's as much a problem in Hudson and Passaic County as it is in Morris County and Warren and Sussex. Take a minute and just read this and absorb it, because it's still, this statistic stops me in my tracks. We have a consumption problem. We as a society are always looking for the quick fix, right? Turn on your television at night, and what will you probably see? Some direct advertising directly to you from a pharmaceutical company. It's us and I think one other nation in the world where that happens. How did we ever expect not to end up in this? So what I'm going to do for you right now is play a very quick clip of some early advertising by pharmaceutical companies, and this wasn't to you, the consumer, this was actually a training video that was provided to doctors. And we go back to the mid to late 1990s because that's where things really started to change with prescription opioids. This is the era where we go from end-of-life type use to being widespread prescribing. So just kind of draw your attention to the center of the screen, and you're going to see the video training video that was provided to the doctors. Right up here is the cover of that video. It's from Purdue. Swing is alive. It's two elderly individuals. Maybe they're doing that because they're high. I don't know.
There's no question that our best, strongest pain medicines are the opioids, but these are the same drugs that have a reputation for causing addiction and other terrible things. Now, in fact, the rate of addiction amongst pain patients who are treated by doctors is much less than 1%. They don't wear out, they go on working, they do not have serious medical side effects. And so these drugs, which I repeat are our best, strongest pain medications, should be used much more than they are for patients in pain.
Yeah, so this is late 1990s, then we go 10 times the amount of prescribing, and it's much more than that. I think recently I read in the state of New York that every member or every citizen in the state of New York could have a 30-day supply of oxycodone based on the amount of oxycodone that is prescribed in the state. And New York is not an outlier. This is the United States as a whole. This is New Jersey as well. How could we not have ended up with losing over 60,000 Americans, as the prosecutor said a year ago, because of these powerful medications? So continuing on that 101, let's move on to heroin. Primarily coming from Afghanistan, South America, much of it up through our southern border. These are, of course, our source areas. It's always been a bit of a cash crop, right, for terrorism. Afghanistan, one of the reasons it shows up on there. On the streets called dope, diesel, orse, H, smack, black tar, junk. These are just different street terms. I put them out there so that when you're looking at your middle schoolers or your high schoolers' phones, which I hope you're doing, when you see these terms, they jump out to you and that you know them. What happens to produce the heroin? They come along in the fields, they score the poppy plant, it produces an ooze, a little bit of chemistry, that's ultimately able to be produced into powder. Heroin is sold in a powdery form. So what it looks like, I think the best description that I can give, I know I got a narcotics detective in the audience, so he's probably maybe gonna roll his eyes at me, but it almost looks like ground up yellow chalk. It's kind of a white to off-white consistency. And it's sold in folds, and I'll have some photographs of those folds shortly for you. Remember what I told you when we talked about the pills? Notice some of the similarities in the effects and how quick the high is. Again, it's often abused by snorting it, not by injecting it. Many users, as they get deeper and deeper into the disease, deeper and deeper into the addiction, end up turning to intravenous use, but they don't start out that way. And you can notice that the effects are pretty much the same as the pills. So obviously in my line of work, I speak with a lot of heroin users. These are our witnesses, these are informants, these are our defendants. And it's almost eerie. They all have often very similar stories, very similar backgrounds as to how they got into the disease. So rather than me just kind of relaying that to you, I'm going to play a short clip, and you can hear a story, her story.
It overwhelms the individual. It essentially kind of takes the brain hostage.
Hostage taker, heroin. Addicts say once the poison enters your body, your brain falls in love with it, and the habit is almost impossible to kick. No one knows that better than a 20-year-old we found, a heroin addict named April Arian.
Addiction landed her in and out of jail and rehab, and for 4 years, she sits down with Alexandra Lewis for a very candid interview.
Well, the 20-year-old heroin addict lives in her car and doesn't shy away from the fact that her addiction can and probably will kill her.
It's like God's angels massaging your whole body and like your mind.
20-year-old April Arian remembers her first intravenous high well. It's a feeling after 4 years of heroin addiction she's never felt again.
It's never the same. And you just chase it. And then you start needing it. You don't want it, you need it.
At 16, April boasted a 4.2 GPA with scholarship offers to multiple colleges. While a hard partier on weekends, it wasn't until she fell in love that her life took a turn.
We met at a party and he just, we started rolling on ecstasy, doing stuff that we considered party drugs.
April started snorting heroin at age 16.
I was in a drug dealer's house on the east side of Dayton shooting dope. It just, for me, it happened really quick. The first time I shot it, I was hooked.
April, who says she shoots up all day every day, and a couple of hours without heroin makes her deathly ill or dope sick.
I'm homeless. I don't have anything.
The 20-year-old was kicked out of her home for repeatedly stealing from her mother to buy dope, a high that only lasts minutes or even seconds.
If I knew when I was 16 and did that first line of heroin, if I knew what was gonna happen, I would have never touched it. You throw your life away.
The once vivacious, ambitious teen says there is nothing she hasn't done for a high.
You think your kid's not gonna turn out that way? You think my mom thought I was gonna turn out like this? I was the golden child, the perfect daughter.
Needle marks and collapsed veins, the 85-pound 20-year-old is a shell of her former self and hopes parents and teens are taking note.
So to think that you can play with it and do it on the weekends and do it with your friends because everybody's doing it and it's okay. It's not. You're playing with fire and you're gonna get burned.
April's last unsuccessful stint in rehab was in January. She says some days she truly believes she wants to quit, but most days she can only think about where her next high will come from.
I was able to look up April a few months ago and see how she was doing. And the good news is she's alive. You can't always say that for somebody who's this deep into the disease. Unfortunately, we see often 3 paths for somebody who's experiencing the disease as she is. And death is one of those paths. Incarceration is one of the other paths, and that's where April is. She's incarcerated, and she's fortunately receiving treatment in incarceration. We're taking advantage of that sort of downtime, so to speak. And the third path is recovery. And it is possible. People do recover from this disease. It's a hard path. We don't want you walking out of here tonight thinking that recovery isn't possible, which is why one of the reasons we end with CARES, who is so good, so effective at navigating various paths to recovery. So I know Alton will be here to kind of talk a little bit about that. $3 a fold. I promised you I would have some photographs of folds of heroin, and they're up here on the screen for you. You may notice brands like Out of Stock, Party Rock, things like that. They're no different than Coke or Pepsi have their brands and trademarks, right? Heroin distributors have their brands and trademarks, things that they're putting out on the streets, certain folds that users can get on the phone and order, I want more of that Party Rock, because they liked the high that they got out of it. And we are seeing heroin in your area, in Morris County, being sold for as little as $3, typically when it's being purchased in bulk. It used to be average of $10 a fold. It's been getting cheaper and cheaper since I've been in the prosecutor's office, since I've been working narcotics cases for about 13 years. It almost, when we saw it being purchased for $3, it was an undercover operation, and the particular sergeant is saying they're almost giving this stuff away now. And it's not that it's being watered down. In fact, its purity is increased. If it's just heroin itself, it probably has fentanyl in it. We're going to talk a little bit about fentanyl shortly. Also sold in bundles, bricks, and sleeves. These are just different street terms for amounts as you buy it in bulk. For purposes of sort of a size reference, These are how small the folds are next to your pack of cigarettes. I didn't want you to think they were as big as the photos that I just showed you what might have suggested. And we're talking about a very small amount of that sort of ground up chalk, that powder that's in each one of these folds, between 0.01 and 0.03 grams per fold. So do I have some people that are like, well, what the heck's a gram, right? The metric system. I kind of struggle with the metric system. So for all of you that are struggling with the metric system, like me, I have this slide. It would take, if we're talking about 0.01, which is a pretty good standard now, it would take 100 folds or 2 bricks to get to a gram. So you're talking about a lot of actual individual dosages of heroin just to get to 1 gram of powder. So let me do a quick criminal justice 101. I promise I won't spend too much time here because I see a couple people are like, oh, I don't want a criminal justice 101. We'll get through this very quickly. In New Jersey, we have 1st through 4th degree indictable crimes or felonies. 1st and 2nd degree crimes, if you are convicted of them, under our law, there's a presumption at your sentencing that you will be sent to state prison. With 3rd and 4th degree indictable or felony level crimes, if you are convicted, there's a presumption that you will not go to state prison unless you have a significant criminal record. One of our challenges that we deal with is that the way heroin is grouped into our statutes, it's actually grouped in with many of our other drugs like cocaine. And it's going to take over 708 folds, if we're talking about 0.02, just to get to that 2nd degree weight. We're talking about a significant amount of heroin versus like cocaine. I'm talking maybe about 14, 15 dosages. But for some reason, our statutes are grouped in. So that's something to be aware of as we are sort of aggressively going after our for-profit drug heroin dealers. Some of you might be thinking, well, how much does someone use, right? We're talking about dosage units. You're seeing 1 dosage per fold, but what does someone use in any given day? Well, what we know is their addiction probably started out with the pills or something else. Then it moved in to heroin, and we have seen upwards of an individual using 30, 40, 45, 50 folds of heroin a day just to get by. Remember April? Remember how she said it really wasn't about the high anymore? It's about not getting sick. Anyone seen someone in an opioid withdrawal? You would not wish it on your worst enemy. It's like having the flu, but a lot worse. Like their skin wants to crawl off. And if you are using opioids, if you're using pills and then you're using heroin and then you just try to stop, you're going to be deep in that withdrawal. The reason I have a big picture of a Budweiser up there is because talking about amounts, it's kind of like an alcoholic. It starts out with a couple beers a night, moves up to a 6-pack, and from there. Same thing goes with an opioid user. More just to maintain, to keep from getting sick. So some trends that we're seeing. Everyone know what this is down in the corner? It's a die for a pill press. You can actually go on eBay right now if you want to pull out your phone, and you can find the dies, and you can also find the very well-made machines that can pump out hundreds and hundreds of pills. And what we're seeing is dealers are taking these pill presses, I don't know if you can spot the fake and the real up there, and they're pressing heroin or fentanyl into pills, and then they're selling it. Anyone know why? This is the class participation part. Anyone know why someone would do that? Why a dealer is going to take heroin and fentanyl, street fentanyl, and put it in a pill?
Make more money.
Exactly, because make more money. So you're my entrepreneur in the audience, and it's purely about economics. So I can take my $3 fold of heroin, I can mix it with some other adulterants, dilutants, and put it into a pill. I can convince your high school senior that he or she that's attending the party, a farming party, and pulling some of those pills came from grandma's medicine cabinet, but actually it's street heroin or street fentanyl, and I can sell it for $20 or $30. So it's pure economics. This is that price per gram shooting down. So that is a photograph of a floor in Morris County. Those are all those individual folds. I hope they're not washed out with the lighting in here. That's a lot of heroin, right? It's a ton of heroin folds. In fact, I don't remember if this was the living room or if this was the bedroom, because basically every room in the house looked like this. You would open drawers in the bedroom and they would be full. So what are we looking at here? A dealer's stash or a user? Raise your hand for dealer. User. The I don't knows or I don't cares, I guess would be the third. Yeah, this is a user. These are all actually consumed. These are all empty. These are all used. So when we executed the warrant and found the conditions like this, let me tell you a little bit about the individual that was living there, as we learned about her. She grew up in Morris County. She was exposed to everything that you get in this county. Good education. She came from a good family. And she lived in the house. She had a small child that was living with her, around 2 years old. She was using, at the time that I think the detectives spoke with her, and this of course is self-reported, so we'll take it for what it is, around 40 folds a day just to get by. And she was pregnant. Yeah, there's many victims associated with this epidemic. And I know what the room is thinking, you have to be thinking in this, is how does this happen? How does somebody come from education, access to employment, a child, and a child on the way, go to using 40 folds of heroin a day? And I'm a prosecutor, I'm involved in law enforcement. It's tough for me to wrap my head around this. And the best way I can understand it is it's a complete reprogramming, a complete change of that brain. So this is where I'm really stepping outside my lane and I'm kind of getting into the medical side. I'm not going to tell you what I got in biology in college. And it's a reprogramming of that brain. That brain changes when it gets addictive type substances on board. Do you guys know that the brain is developing upwards to age 28? Actually, I think the male brain is 28. The female brain is a little bit younger for full development. My wife reminds me of that all the time, but it's 28. In fact, if we were going to make the drinking age purely on science, it would be age 28, because that's when that brain is fully developed and is less susceptible to becoming an addicted brain. That's not to say, don't think, oh, you're sitting there, everyone who's over age 28, I'm good to go. There are senior citizens that become addicted to opioids. And when I have slides at the end, I'll show you the range. There are people that get addictions much even later in life. It's just that you're more susceptible to it at then. And the other thing that this slide should highlight, and I want to talk a little bit about, is does everyone in this room accept addiction as a disease? Is it a disease? Because if I don't have you convinced, if the panel of speakers up here today does not have you convinced that this is a disease, then you're going to stay and you're going to talk to me tonight until you are convinced. Because until we as a society accept that it is a disease, we will not beat it. And you know, it seemed like I got general acceptance from the room that it is a disease, but it was 2016 where the Surgeon General actually first puts out a report and talks about addiction as a disease. So these are new concepts. It wasn't 2006, 1996, 1986, it was 2016.
Police in Massachusetts looking to file child endangerment charges, look at this, against a mother who apparently overdosed on heroin in a store with her toddler next to her. Investigators have been looking at this YouTube video. It has been viewed millions of times by people. and it seems to show the woman sprawled out in the aisle of a store as her 2-year-old daughter tugs her hand, trying to revive her. You can hear the 2-year-old crying there for her mom. Paramedics rushed the woman to the hospital after reviving her with the antidote Narcan. The toddler is now in the custody of Child Protective Services.
I don't show you these videos to shock you. I show them to you to make this real. You need to know that these types of calls, these types of cases are being responded to in your county, in your community. And I think it's been pretty well reported that this is now the leading cause of accidental death, surpassing firearms as well as motor vehicle crashes. And realize that the detectives, the law enforcement officers, your other first responders, they're tired of it. They're tired of responding to this community's living room, standing in the living room with a crying mom and dad, with a dead 22-year-old in the bedroom that he or she grew up in. This is what we're seeing. And we'll do everything in our power to work to stop it, to break this cycle. And there's not one part of our country that's not seeing this. And you can see the darker red are the areas that are experiencing more and more of this opiate plague. You can see the East Coast and New Jersey is a bit of an epicenter. So much of why we're seeing just this increase in deaths within the last 3 years is fentanyl. You couldn't have an opioid presentation and not talk about fentanyl now, unfortunately. And it was something that probably 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't even know what it was. But now it's being seen in about 33% of the folds, of the heroin folds that we see. So every third fold has some sort of fentanyl in it, if not is a mixture with heroin, if not pure fentanyl. It's around 28 different types of fentanyl currently on our street per the DEA. So you guys know what fentanyl is? Let me play you a quick clip as to the description of it.
It can go by the street names China White or China Girl, or the more scientific names Actic, Duragesic. Most know it as fentanyl. And over the last year, overdoses from drugs like this are up more than 80%. Fentanyl is part of a class of drugs known as opioids. It is also one of the most powerful narcotics used in medicine. Some context, you know morphine. Fentanyl is up to 100 times more powerful. That's part of the reason it is diverted or stolen from pharmacies and hospitals, or made illegally in labs. Dealers will frequently add fentanyl to heroin to give it more of a kick. It's called cutting the heroin, and especially if you're not expecting it, it can be deadly. That's because fentanyl is also 50 times stronger than heroin. It is so powerful that just 1/4 milligram can be fatal.
Yeah, now it's being found in all 21 counties and about 1/3 of the heroin supply. And again, it's for my entrepreneur in the audience, it's economics. Anyone know what a kilo of heroin's going for now around here? And if anyone does, I'm gonna probably have someone follow you out. Around $60,000. You know what a kilo of fentanyl is going for? Something that's more powerful, between $3,000 and $6,000. So I need less of it, I'm gonna be able to get more of a kick. It's easier to smuggle because I need less of it. That's one of the reasons we're seeing it. You guys hear about carfentanil? Gray death. The reason they call it that is because it's often used to tranquilize large mammals, elephants, rhinoceros, things like that. Just a small amount next to the penny would be a fatal dosage of it. So fentanyl is coming in across our borders, right? China is the pretty much sole source. You might have heard in the video talking about diverted from pharmacies. So much of our fentanyl that we're seeing on the streets is not pharmaceutical grade fentanyl. It's made in illegal labs. And actually a lot of what we know about fentanyl, or a lot of what you read sort of on the medical side, is misleading because it's all studies of medical grade fentanyl. But this is all being made either in the United States or right in China. The precursor materials come across from China and mixed together. There's about 28 different fentanyls currently. Get this, there are 160,000 chemical companies in China ready to provide you with the precursor materials. You can go through certain websites and be able to start ordering it, and that's what we're fighting right now. We're seeing scenes like this that look like hazmat scenes. Real quick on this particular dealer, is that the dealer that you would expect seeing? This comes from out in Utah, and was one of the biggest fentanyl dealers that has ever been arrested. That's where he ran his operation, that house right there. That's some of the cash millions, and these were the pills that he was putting together with fentanyl from China. And you might be wondering, well, why are you showing me a Utah dealer? Because when you actually traced where his pills were going, the East Coast, including Morris County in New Jersey, was areas that he was distributing all through the dark web. So this is what we're dealing with. Again, your high school senior that's getting a pill at a party that you thought came from grandma actually is street fentanyl. Let's move into our statistics before I turn the program over to Sheriff Gannon. One of the things that you've gotten is some national statistics. You may have read about some of the state statistics, but I want you all leaving knowing exactly what's happening in Morris County, because the media doesn't always print that, so you know what's happening here. And just so everyone's on the same page, what I'll play you is a really good video that NJ.com had put together that gives you the statewide statistics. So let's move right into Morris County's data. We're dealing with really up-to-date data. We're talking about 2014 until just the end of last year. And you can see that if there's any discrimination with this disease, it's affecting more men than women, although there's been an uptick, and it's still 27% of the individuals that are using or dying or overdosing are females. Notice that age range, 14 to 84, so affecting everyone from middle school to a senior citizen. And that's not unique to any year. You'll see as I break the data down that that's consistent. So it does not discriminate. There's a lot of data up on this particular screen. I don't expect you to memorize this, and I can summarize it very simply for you. Arrests are up, overdoses are up, and seizures are up over the last few years. You can see all that data on the map, and you can see that the people, this is home addresses of those being arrested, dying, or overdosing. And you can see that that's happening in Morris County, and it is affecting the entire north of our state. But that 60-some-odd% of those residents that are dying, overdosing, or being arrested actually live in our county. So this isn't a transient thing. This is just people passing through. These are our residents. You also might notice that there's not one community that's spared there. Sort of see the 80-287 corridor. That's just our population centers. That's why you see the sort of concentration of dots in that area versus some of our more rural areas. We can't change our proximity from Patterson or Newark, source areas, places where it's very easy to go down and purchase. But don't misunderstand me. You can purchase it right here in your township. You can have it delivered, as the prosecutor often uses the analogy. What we see in this county is it's like having your heroin delivered like a pizza. You get on the phone and it's delivered to you. It's delivered to either your home or some other public area. And we know that from various wiretap investigations that we do. Taking all this data on the map, and you just kind of see the hot spots. These are the communities in our county that are experiencing the most. So the deaths. What I'm talking about now are fatal opiate overdoses. 35 and 14, that climbed to 43 and 15, 64 and 16, and 79 in 2017. Those are the top municipalities. Anyone want to guess This was last year in 2016, what the #1 town for fatalities was. Any guesses? No one wants to guess now. Montville Township. Would that be the town you would think would have the most fatal opiate overdoses? Again, I'm trying to break through that stigma and realize that you shouldn't necessarily go with your preconceived notion. So 79 fatal opiate overdoses in 17. Just to give us some perspective and some reference, there was 2 murders in the county and 32 fatal motor vehicle crashes, 64 opiate fatal overdoses in 16, no murders, and 21 fatal motor vehicle crashes. So clearly the leading cause of accidental, preventable death. And this is just another sort of graphical way to look at it. And as that comes across your screen and you're seeing all those figures, you need to remember, we're talking about statistics, and some of you I know probably glaze over when we talk about statistics, but each one of those figures up there is a son or a daughter. And I was reminded of this recently at a program just like this in Pequannock Township when I was handed this mass card by a mom. Mom came up to me after the program and said, hey, my son was one of those. At the time we had 35 overdoses. And that's when I learned a little bit about Justin. So Justin Finnerty was born June 28th of 1990 and died July 30th of 2016. Got to learn a little bit about him. He grew up in Montville, grew up off of Pine Brook Road. I grew up in Montville right off of Pine Brook Road. Very well could have been me, my brother, my best friend. And I also met his little sister at another program. These are real people. These are our neighbors that are dying. You guys heard about Narcan, really successful program that Prosecutor Knapp put in place in this county, making sure that your first responders, your police officers have it with them. And now every police department in the county is carrying Narcan. Let's talk a little bit about those statistics. In 2015, there was 50 deployments or 44 reversals, second chances given in 16. That climbed to 110 and 182 in 17. We're going to well surpass that this year based on current numbers. So that's 182 second chances that were provided to members of your community by uniformed police. So how about a round of applause? Because I know we have some uniformed police officers here. Can you imagine if that 182 been on top of the 79 and the deaths we'd be looking at in this county? So what are we doing? As the prosecutor led with, we know we can't arrest our way out of this problem. We will not be able to solve this problem with handcuffs. And the idea is to break the cycle of addiction through rehabilitation for that drug user, that person who's suffering from the disease of addiction. We'll really go back to what our core mission is as prosecutors. What's our core mission? It's to save lives and reduce crime in your community. And how do we do that? Is breaking that cycle of addiction, not just housing them in prison. But don't get me wrong, because sometimes this distinction is missed. It's missed by the media. I don't know if we got media here, but it's missed by them. And that is that for-profit drug distributor, that person that's putting poison on the street that's killing your kids. That person needs state prison. That person needs to be put away. And we work really hard at doing that. But we also work really hard at diverting drug users into treatment. Burglars who are suffering from the disease into treatment so that they don't just come out and re-burglarize your house. The PMP program, I won't spend much time talking about this, but the idea that arming doctors and prescribers as well as law enforcement so that they know when they have someone sitting in front of them faking that back illness just to get a prescription to either go use themselves illegally or sell on the streets. So that's helping us. The Regional Operations Intelligence Center, the idea of data sharing. The idea that county prosecutors' offices across the state, through the state police, local law enforcement throughout the state are getting linked up, and we're able to do real-time data sharing so that if there's an overdose tonight in Washington Township by a particular stamp and they're having a rash of overdoses in Essex County and in Ocean County from that same stamp, we're going to target that dealer. That dealer might get ripped off that street corner by narcotics detectives in Passaic County by narcotics detectives right here from Morris County. So that data sharing, use of intelligence is huge. Pawn item database, the idea of also working on the property crime is something that we're really working hard on in order to address this epidemic. You guys remember Dropbox? Prosecutor talked about that. That's just a picture. If you do one thing, that's an easy thing that you can do, is don't become the inadvertent drug distributor. Don't let your house get broken into. Don't let your child or a friend steal that medication and use it. And if you think that these things don't matter, very quick story. We recently responded to a death scene in the county, and at that death scene, there was a young girl in her bed, and next to her dead body was a prescription pills. And on that prescription was her grandmother's name, because that's where she had stolen the medication. So don't become that inadvertent drug dealer. That's my contact information. I'm here, I think, because I was seen speaking at another group, and if you are coming from a Chamber of Commerce, some sort of group, and you want my office to come out and speak on this topic, we want to be there. It's critical that we continue to educate, that we continue to have dialogue about this. So please take my contact information.